So if we were in a regular class, face to face, we certainly would have a discussion about whether having two major parties only are a good thing, and if that's a good thing, if that's serving our country well. Since we can't have that type of discussion, I just can only say I just leave that for you to decide for yourself and would encourage you to think about that very seriously indeed. But since the mid 19th century, the mid 1800s here, the Republicans and the Democrats, they've had pretty much equal strength. And this is basically true. Some nations like Italy, they have many small political parties that maybe take up 5 seats in the parliament, 10 seats, not very big at all. Their governments aren't very stable because they have to form coalitions around issues and coalitions to form a government, and it's all based on they working together and people's ability to work together and get along. Which, depending upon your view of human nature, is could or could not be an easy thing to do. So, this may be a good thing. And why might having unstable governments that fall apart easy be a good thing? Well, you're getting a more representative view of the will of the people. You have a government that is more likely to be responsive to somebody's needs. There's no, there might be term limits. You might be elected to the parliament for 5 years, but the parliament may be over and you're up for re-election in one. Whereas in our system, you're there for 2 years if you're representative, 6 if you're senator, 4 if you're president, unless something very, very bad happens. That's the pro of having a government like Italy. Is that going to happen here? Absolutely not. But I wanted you to see just the other side of the coin and what could be. So results of presidential elections, they're not really great indicators of where the nation is politically. I think you have to look at a more micro level analysis of things. I had a small technical snafu, my apologies. So you have to look at a more micro level analysis of things. I've chosen the U.S. House of Representatives to illustrate this particular example. So, like in our state, Illinois, you'd never know there was a Republican, Libertarian, Green, Socialist, whatever in the place, right? Because every presidential election, Team Democrat wins, with the exception of Ronald Reagan in 1984. So, for example, right now we have 18 House seats. There are 13 Democrats and 5 Republican members there in the Illinois congressional delegation. Excuse me. Not a lot of Republicans, but there are Republican districts, especially downstate, that you wouldn't know were there if you were just looking at a presidential map. I don't know who your representative is. Certainly not. A lot of you listen to these. Analytics dictate that the YouTube analytics tell me that not everybody that listens to these things are even in the United States. So the representative, I don't know. You all live in different places. That you'll have to look up. But if you live in Illinois, and most of the people listening to this do live in Illinois, your senators are Dick Durbin and Tammy Duckworth. They represent the whole state, both of them. So here I'm just trying to show you, these are the compositions of the various Congresses. I think if anything, we tend to skew a little more conservative, just when we get down to the kind of the more micro level. The House seats, they haven't changed, 435. That's been the number since 1929. And it's pretty evenly distributed. There's not like a great whopping difference. A couple of years there are 188 Democrats, 247 Republicans. That's a big difference. 257 Democrats, 178 Republicans. That's a big difference. But most of these, there's not really, we're not deviating too far from a 50-50 power sharing scheme. So like 222 in this Congress, Democrats 212. That's really not that huge of a difference. And the last one, a little bigger, you know, but there you go. I mean, that's what the House looks like. So, I mean, it tends maybe to skew a little more conservative. In the others, the politically astute among you might say, well, hold on, wasn't there a libertarian in the last Congress? Yes. The reason why he is not, his name was Justin Amash. His name is Justin Amash. He just left the House. He's still with us. He, he switched party affiliation mid-Congress, so he was not elected as a libertarian. He was elected as a Republican, which is why he counts here. This comes from the House.gov website. So where are we at today? We've got the Republican Party that controls nothing federally, but they control a majority of state governments. There are 27 Republican governors, 32 state senates, 29 state houses nationwide that are under Republican control. Now, this is particularly good for them when it comes to, this will be particularly good for them when it comes to redistricting, because the party in power tends to have the most influence over the maps. So we'll come to redistricting probably a little bit later. Nebraska isn't counted in here. Nebraska is a unicameral legislature. So there's just a Nebraska Senate, and it's nonpartisan. So there's no official Democrat, Republican. There are Republicans and Democrats get elected there, but there's no, there wouldn't be like Jonathan Parker L. They're just elected as a person to represent a district. So the Democrats, they control everything. Senate, House, presidency, and have a minority in the state governments with 23 Democratic governors, 18 state senators, and 19 state houses. And again, Nebraska is unicameral and nonpartisan. You don't need to know this, but I'm not real sure why the nonpartisan thing developed. But it would be an interesting question if any of you are looking for a topic for a research paper. So parties flip views over time. All right, so we have the liberal philosophy, conservative over here. Now this, think Democrat, Republican. The Federalists were once upon a time considered to be liberal in their outlook. Again, why? They wanted a bigger government, whereas the Democratic Republicans favored reading the Constitution maybe a little more closely. These guys developed into the Whigs. The Republican Party used to be the Liberal Party until, if I had to say, maybe somewhere between 1880 and 1920, this switch really happened. Truly, the Republican Party became the Republican Party we know today. And the same thing with the Democrats and Democratic Republicans to Andrew Jackson's Democratic Party and more Democratic Party, and they switch and they become the Liberal Party. Well, what are third parties? You're lucky you're in this class. You're asking the right guy what third parties are. Third parties, very basically speaking, are any party that isn't a Democrat or Republican. This guy is a very prominent third party candidate. He ran for president in 2000. His name is Ralph Nader. He was with the Green Party. He did pretty darn well. Yeah, any other party that's not known as a Democratic or Republican Party, that's a third party. We've never gained control of the White House. Although, take it from me, we will never give up trying. But we've had success in Congress. Most notably, Justin Amash in the last Congress. And we do really a lot better in the lower levels of government. There are just a few, and by a few I mean I think like two libertarians that were elected to state houses nationwide. We do great on county boards, some city, town councils, and other parties do as well. So when these smaller groups challenge the two major parties, they can change the outcome of elections, and this is true, but we don't often throw them as some in the media and others might make out. Like in some states this time around, the vote margin for Jorgensen in particular would have swung a state from Biden to Trump or Trump to Biden, depending on who you favored in that state. But that's not usually the case that happens. So there are ideological parties. What are ideological parties? Well, parties that have a political platform based on a certain set of social or moral beliefs. The Libertarian Party is an ideological party. We believe in nonviolence. We believe in leaving you alone. We believe in, you live your life, I'll live mine. Let's, voluntarism, a lack of coercion, basically, just a live and let live mentality. There are also the Socialist Party, the Communist Party. These are two other examples of ideological parties. So you have single issue parties, and it's in the name right there. The parties that form around a single issue, just a single primary issue. There is, for example, the Right to Life Party, and their symbol here is this little baby. They're probably a pro-life party. The Free Soil and Know Nothings, those are no longer active political groups. Those were 1800s. Those were popular. There are also economic protest parties. So there are economic problems, a party grows around it. The Tea Party was an example of this. Back in the early 2010s, it was decided that, we were being taxed too much, the government was spending too much of our money, and some people, well, not some, but a lot of people had a real problem with the debt. That party, it wasn't really, it was kind of an offshoot of the Republicans, but it was an economic protest movement primarily, and they propelled quite a few candidates who are still there to national office. I'm the only one that's coming to mind right now is Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky. He's still around. He was a Tea Party candidate. Tea Party isn't really around much anymore, at least in Illinois. And there are splinter parties. So these guys have a problem with a major party or a third party, and they pursue their own agenda. We had an example of this. I'll tell you. I don't know if I should tell you the story, but I'm going to anyway. The Metro East Libertarian Party was, until very recently, a subsidiary of the Libertarian Party of Illinois, decided to break away to pursue their own agenda of educating the public on what libertarianism is, running more local candidates, and just concentrating on bringing back libertarian ideals to their multi-county area. So they submitted a formal letter of resignation to me and other members of the executive board, and they are no longer with us. So there's the Libertarian Party of Illinois, and I don't know even really what they're calling themselves now, but they're a splinter group because they've cut away from the main party. So there's also the Bull Moose Party. So Teddy Roosevelt was the only candidate to run under this. He felt as good and as fit as a bull moose, so he was going to run for president again. The Progressive Party, the American Party. I mean, these are things you can look up. I'm not going to. I might ask you what a splinter party is, but I doubt very much I'd ask you what an example of one was. So we touched on this, but voters don't generally receive third parties too well. They're spoilers. At least that's how they're viewed. So yeah, they generally. I disagree with this statement, but again, it's in the book. Third parties play the role of spoiler in an election. And why do I disagree? I think that's a fair question, and I can see some of you, based on communications, asking me that. Why do I disagree? Well, I don't think that I don't happen to think that my vote belongs to the Democratic or Republican or Libertarian Party. My vote is my own to give to whomever candidate I choose. So if I decide I'm going to vote for the Green Party candidate, well, that's because that candidate shares my beliefs, my ideas, my vision, whatever it is. The same Libertarian, Republican, Democrat. No one party has a lock on your vote. Research. Find out who represents your ideas. Please don't check a box just with some guy's name and a D or R or whatever after it. Nobody has a lock on your vote. And that's why I don't think third parties play the role of spoilers in an election. But the book says they do. So sometimes their issues get absorbed into the two major parties, which is true. For example, marijuana. That was a libertarian issue since the founding of the Libertarian Party, and now that's something that the two major parties are banding about. So we have one-party systems as well. Not in the United States, but in other countries. So nations, quite a few, most nations have a choice, give the people a choice. You want Democrat, you want Republican, what do you want? But some nations only have a one-party governmental system that forbids more parties. Dictatorships, fascist regimes, communist regimes are but a few examples of that. So you vote for the communist candidate. You vote for whatever candidate you're kind of forced to. One-party system. I mean, the island off the coast of Florida there, Cuba. This might have changed slightly, or the rules were bent a little bit, because I know they were doing some work on their constitution recently. But up until Very, very recently anyway, the Constitution only recognized the Communist Party as the only legal party on the island. So everybody had to run communist. Now, did everybody run communist? No. And I'm sure not great things happened to those people who decided to be independent or whatever. But that is the way it is in some parts of the world. So we are going to stop here. Come back in a minute.